What does climate justice mean to you?
Well, climate justice is actually, it's a collective term, right? What we're personally are fighting for is to bring climate justice in context when it comes to young people and future generations. So for us, that means young people to be included in policy making, decision making, and in all policies future related, basically. That's what climate justice means for me personally.
Okay, and so what kind of policies are you guys advocating for?
So right now we're looking at the human rights aspect. So what we say is that human rights are not currently being included when it comes to the adverse effects of climate change. So what we want is to make it clear by an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice that the impacts of the climate crisis are being, with regard to our human rights, are being explained by the court, so that we can use this in national future cases, but also to explain and interpret the Paris agreements in a better way, so we can improve policies globally, so we can actually aim for that 1.5 degrees a maximum increase of temperature. So that's what we're trying to seek with this advisory opinion, because right now the UN, of all UN bodies, the ICJ is the last body to have never spoken before about climate change, and that's why we're seeking the court right now.
Interesting. And so what does human rights mean to you? How do you define human rights?
Well, human rights are very broad, right? So you have the right to live, the right on adequate housing. All of these rights are currently being affected by the brunt of the climate crisis. So what we're trying to say is that actually all of our human rights at the same time are collectively being attacked because our world leaders are not acting up in order to combat the consequence of it. So every single right that you can think of is at threat due to the climate crisis. Our right to live, especially of those living in the Pacific, because this campaign started by young people in the Pacific, is at risk right now. They see their own islands disappear in front of their eyes. So it goes to show that human rights are such a broad concept, but also a very intangible concept, that we need to discuss this at the International Court to make it known for everyone around the globe.
Okay, I want to come back to this concept of the South Pacific Islands,
yes.
But continuing on the theme of human rights, it looks like
yes.
you're University of Hawaii. Are you American or are you from the United States?
So this is actually, we're just helped by the University of Hawaii. I'm from the Netherlands.
Oh, okay.
I go to the University of Leiden,
okay.
But it's like a partnership that with the friends over there. So,
okay,
yeah.
Because I'm from the United States. In
yeah.
the United States, in our Constitution, in our founding documents, we have this concept that God has given people certain rights, the right to life, like you said,
mm-hmm.
The right to own property, the right to liberty, free speech, things like this, and the government must not infringe on them. And it's a very different concept from the idea that you have a right to a house, I guess, where the
yeah.
government must take money from other people. And
so like the social human rights and the basic human rights, so to say.
Well, it's very different concepts, I guess, the UN vision and the American one.
Yeah.
And so how do you see those two interacting? Is there a conflict between the two?
So you're asking an international law student right now, and I personally think that we have universal human rights. And in that sense...
Where do they come from?
I mean, it depends who you ask, obviously. Some say it's like a divine given, or some say it's just already intrinsically a part of our law system, so to say. I personally think that it comes from whatever we value most. And I think that if we look at human rights themselves right now, we need to value the quality of life. And 1.5 degrees is enough for a lot of people to survive, but we want people to thrive. And that's why climate justice in its core essence of young people and CSOs being active here at COP and elsewhere around the globe is so important and so essential. Because you cannot protect those human rights you just mentioned before without the active presence of the entire constituency or society as a whole. So if you ask me, human rights are agreed upon by the community that works or lives in that same community. So it's a community-based thing, I would say. Yeah.
Does that pose some danger? What if the community decides that we don't like your church, or we don't like your newspaper, or we don't like you, and we're going to take your house and kill you?
So I think that people always look at democracy from a perspective that the majority decides over the minorities. But a democracy is actually the majority taking care of the concerns and issues of those minority groups. And right now, if you look at the Pacific, for example, we see that those minority groups living there, in minorities in the terms of on a global scale, we, as the global West, so to say, the global North, should take care of those people living there, because their lives are currently at stake. It's not a 10-year thing, it's not a 2030, 2050, it's right now. So it only makes sense that we, as a global community, here at COP, work our asses off, sorry for part of my language.
Fine. We might have to bleep it out.
might have to bleep it out. To work as hard as possible to get their lives and get their rights secured and protected. Because right now we're doing the opposite. We're looking, we're understanding, we give them a podium, but we're not acting on it. We're allowing fossil fuel companies to keep drilling, keep going on with the same basic old notions of the old economy, while we don't have a plan for afterwards. I mean, every time someone says 2050, net zero in 2050, it's based on future predictions.
Yeah.
But the water rise, the rises of water that's currently rising in the levels, that's not a prediction. That's happening right now. It's real life, and it frustrates me that we are talking about potential solutions while there's an actual crisis going on.
Well, okay, I want to get right back to that crisis and the water, but before, one more question on the legal aspect. You guys are seeking intervention of an international court.
Yes.
A lot of Americans are very hostile to the idea of international law, international courts.
Yes.
In fact, the U.S. hasn't even ratified the Rome Statute, where we say we're not subject to the jurisdiction of these courts. How would an international court ruling affect Americans if Americans don't consent to submit to that?
Great question. So the advisory opinion is actually a non-binding document. That means that member states of the United Nations are not actually bound by the opinion itself. However, at the same time, we understand that people might find it a little bit difficult to understand that why would an international court judge over us or rule over us, right? Why should they decide over us? At the same time, the climate crisis is not an isolated crisis. It affects us all, but in a different way. So to say that that this problem is only a national problem and for every member states themselves, like, that's just not unfair, because
global problem needs a global
exactly
solution.
And at the same time, I really must say that because of this non-binding element of the advisory opinion, it's also an open invitation for countries to look at it, to understand the opinion, and to then further elaborate on it in their own national legislation. It's not a sort of indictment, it's actually an invitation to work on. So to say, it's not putting up the finger, but it's reaching out a hand. It's giving out a hand to make sure that we have this Paris Agreement in 2015. Let's make use of it. Let's actually proper implement it, and make sure that we have a future generation, fight for the future generation to actually, a planet to live for and fight for. So
Very good, fascinating. So I want to go back now. You talked about the Pacific Islands, the water rising.
Yes.
A few years ago, I interviewed a fascinating individual. His name was Niels Axel-Mortner. He was a sea level reviewer, editor actually for the IPCC for several assessment reports. And we spent half an hour together. It was fascinating. We met by the Baltic Sea, and he showed me where the Swedish king in the 1700s had put a mark where the sea level was. Now that was 3 meters higher than the sea level. And what he said to me, first of all, is anybody who talks about global sea level rise doesn't know what they're talking about, because in some places it can go up, some go down at the same time. And his specialty, he said, was studying the Pacific Islands. And he said that not only was the water not rising, it might even be going down a little bit. And he showed me pictures of a tree that he had been photographing for 50 years. He said the distance from the ocean to that tree is exactly the same for the last 50 years. How do you know, why do you feel confident that you can trust what the IPCC and the UN scientists and climate models are telling you?
Well, because it's very easy to interpret certain diagrams and or statistics, right? But what we like to do, or what we actually do as an organization, as young people, as a campaign, is to link those diagrams with actual stories on the ground. And what we see and what we hear is that, for example, the recent hurricanes and tropical storms that have passed over those islands.
They just hit my house at Florida.
That's my point.
Yeah.
It shows that it's something that's happening more frequently, more intensively. So the intensity and frequency is increasing over time. And there are always examples, like anecdotes of certain scientists somewhere that claim different or claim something else. But at the same time, the human rights that are being affected and the problems that people are actually experiencing from that climate crisis right now are real. You can't put that in a statistic. You can actually ask them themselves, you can see it. So
could they just be natural disasters though? Does it have to be because of human emissions of CO2?
I mean, of course, the human disasters are man-made in that sense. I mean, natural disasters.
But I'm asking, how do we know that? How do we know it's not just a regular?
I'm not a scientist, so you shouldn't ask me for the science-based solutions.
We've asked the IPCC every year. We ask, and they say, no, we don't want to talk to you. So we try very hard.
I understand, but when the thing is, when you ask me about like the scientific background of how climate change is happening and how much of human influence is actually a part of it, I cannot give you an honest answer to that, but I can say you the following. We've seen that temperatures are rising due to the emissions that we have emitted in the past couple of decades, past couple of hundred years. So there is a direct correlation, yes. I'm from Europe, for example, Western Europe, and we have seen that in the recent years, our winters are non-existent anymore. it's November, and back home, my friends are still wearing, like, so to say, their flip-flops outside, while it should be freezing at this point. So I think
And that you're sure that's from our CO2 emissions?
I mean, as far as I can see from the scientific papers that I've read, yes.
Yeah, fascinating. And so in terms of international policy, you talked about the advisory court opinion.
Yes. Advisory opinion, yes.
Yeah, so what would you like this advisory opinion to say, and how would you like nations to kind of turn that into concrete policy? What kind of things do you think are needed?
Well, first of all, we need to have young people to be present at the court, because every member state has the right to actually provide a statement in the hearing phase of the proceedings at the International Court of Justice. And we want to see young people to be present and part of delegations. We want young people to be heard by the judges of the court. Because what we say is, it only makes sense that those who are going to live the longest on this planet will also be included in a process that's going to affect them the longest. So that's why we're currently also looking forward to after the vote itself. So when we get, I'm not saying if, but when we get this advisory opinion of the International Court, we need to have young people, CSOs, NGOs to be present in The Hague at the court to influence the public opinion, the discourse, and also the judgment, the advisory opinion itself. So therefore, what we are actually asking and seeking when we talk to the world leaders, for example, is a direct question in the form of include us in decision making. We don't need to have the fancy treatment. Just give us a seat at the table. It can be a little box for all that matters, but just include us in the process, because we have looked so long to the wrong side of the solutions. We've looked away of the problem, and you see that young people here during this COP. It's very difficult to actually see more youth protests and more young people than it should be. So
why is that? Because the Egyptian government, or what's causing that?
I mean, there are certain limitations in what young people can do here in terms of activism. So I think that it has to do something with that, obviously. And therefore, it's extra important that we are here and that we are making our voices to be heard and clear and loud. So I think, yes, we need to be included in a way. And we're not asking for empowerment, because young people are empowered. We're asking the current generations to be depowering themselves.
Okay.
Give us an opportunity to actually also take up the space that you're being taken up so long.
I want to ask you about America in particular. It's very different from a lot of other places in the world.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of climate deniers, as they're called here, including political leaders, politicians. Many states, the vast majority of people say this whole thing is a fraud. And they teach children in school also that this is not true. So what happens when these young leaders from America who don't believe this stuff, do they get a seat at the table also? And how do we deal with that? I mean, what should schools be teaching? How should schools be teaching? How do you raise up the next generation to really get involved in a productive way, maybe? So,
I mean, as a European, I would like to take it a little bit broader. I mean, climate deniers, you have them everywhere, right? Not only in the United States.
Dutch have climate deniers also?
I mean, obviously, yeah, probably, we probably have them, yeah. I don't know them personally, but you probably have them.
Okay.
My point is, I think we should try to depolarize the debate on climate change and the effects of climate change. It's not a question on are you in favor or against the climate, no, because we're all living in that same climate. It should be, how can we all try to collectively come together to improve our global standards of living? How can we all try to protect our human rights as a community as a whole? And there might be some things that we not agree upon personally. You might be a fan of a certain politician, I am not. That's fine. You can have that right. It's your own entitlement. But at the same time, we live and share only one planet that we know of that is habitable. So it only makes sense that we come together to decide on our own common future. You cannot have a politician on a planet that's dead. You cannot have any policy on a planet that's not alive. So it only makes sense to, while we're living here on this planet, might as well work together to make it livable for our future generations afterwards.
Yeah. And in schools, education, what's the nexus between education, the next generation, and climate issues?
Well, I think that education obviously is the first basic step in getting young people to be involved and to be qualified enough to talk about topics that we're really interested in. So it only makes sense to actually give them the factual information that they should receive and state them the facts that are currently threatening our planet. I think that we should try to dislocate ideology from science, because right now we've seen in the past with like the rise of a lot of extreme right-wing political movements that ideology and scientific are being mangled, so to say. So we need to like detach these two from each other and make sure that we give the priority to science instead of ideology when it comes to teaching young people in the classroom.
Yeah, cool. last question. Why do you trust the science that's coming? What is it that convinced you that the IPCC, that the scientists who are saying these things are correct?
Well, I was in the past UN Youth Delegate myself, and I've had the chance to speak with young people who are also part of the IPCC and negotiators, and some of them even were here at the first COP. Like they were here since the first COP, and what they tell me and what they told us actually was that we are looking at a crisis. We're looking at a house basically that's already burning down. We're in the living room. The living room still is untouched, so to say. We can smell the smoke. We can see the fire outside of the windows, but we're not willing to extinguish the fire. So if you ask me personally, it only makes direct sense to collectively try to steer away from a total collapse of society. Because, the idea alone that we're living on a planet that's not going to be inhabitable for future generations fears me, but it also motivates me to make sure that I will fight for the rights of not myself maybe, but not even my offspring, I don't know, but the generations that will come after me. And I really do believe in our scientists that they are the ones who are showing us the facts. Maybe you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, for example.
Yeah.
We've all seen snippets of it. We really like to laugh things off because they're in the future. Who cares, right? But the future is here, and I think that we need 1.5 to stay alive. We need an advisor opinion to actually bring climate justice to the courts and to the world, and we need young people to be included. We need young people to be at the core of this.
Fascinating. Anything else you want to add?
I would like to call upon all world leaders to vote for this resolution. It's going to take place. The vote's going to take place at the United Nations General Assembly on the 14th of December. It's being brought up by Vanuatu and a core group of other member states. So we need them to step up and to let young people to be at the center of future climate policies.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.